I always found this term kind of confusing because actually none of the summer bulbs are actually bulbs. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to summer bulbs and go over some of the basics as well as describe some of my favorite summer bulbs. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how you can get really inexpensive summer bulbs from the grocery store. So what is a summer bulb? There is no real definition. Summer bulb is a term that gardeners use, and this is sort of the definitions. We buy them in the spring, we plant them in the spring. They flower in the summertime, and for the most part, they're not hardy. For every one of those rules, there's exception. But this kind of gives you an idea of what they are. Almost none of these are true bulb. They're almost all rhizomes or tubers or something like that. So here's some examples that you might know: begonias, dahlias, gladiolus, cannas, elephant ears, and agapanthus, which you may not know, but I'll introduce you to it. You probably know the gladiolus. They're great. In zone 5, most gladiolus are not hardy, and you have to dig them up and bring them inside. But there are species gladiolus that are hardy. I've got some in my garden that have been there for 12 years, and they come back every year. And there are people trying to breed gladiolus that are hardier. But for the most part in zone 5, they don't come back reliably. In spring, the root has stored food in it. This is used to create leaves. So they start growing in spring, the leaves come out, those leaves start making food, and in fact those leaves will be on the plant all summer long, usually till frost. And during that whole time, it's feeding that system underground. I'm going to call it a bulb. And that bulb is getting bigger and it's spreading a bed and making new growths. But the whole point of those leaves is to get a large underground storage system. In fall, the tops die back, and it kind of depends on which one we're talking about, but most of them grow right up until frost, and they're usually cut back by frost. Many of these come from warm climates, and so they don't really know what a winter is. So they think it's summer all the time, and they just keep growing and growing until one day it snows and we get frost and it kills them. In winter, they're dormant, but they have to be dormant inside. Most of these summer bulbs cannot stay outside in zone 5. When you're buying these, you're buying them in spring, and you can buy them one of two ways. You can buy them as dried roots, and they generally come in a bag with a bit of peat moss. When you buy them that way, you typically are not getting great quality plants, although it depends on where you're buying them. You really want to feel those tubers, and they want to feel firm. You don't want anything squishy. You don't want them to be really tiny either, because that means that they've shriveled up over the winter and they may not grow. So you want to feel through that bag and feel like you're really getting a good tuber. It's like buying a potato in the grocery store, right? You wouldn't buy a potato that's all shriveled up, and you wouldn't buy one that isn't firm. So pretend you're buying a potato. The other way to buy these is potted up. A lot of nurseries will bring these in early, start them, get them flowering because, hey, many people like to buy things in flower. In fact, I just bought one of these yellow calla lilies a couple days ago. It was so beautiful I couldn't resist. So a lot of nurseries will sell these already potted up. The downside to that is that you pay a lot more for the plant. The upside is that you know it's going to grow and it already has a start on the season. So it may be worth paying the extra money. These are the things you want to buy early because you want to get them started and get them growing so that by the time our spring arrives and we're past the last frost date, they can go into the garden as plants. We don't want to plant these as roots because our seasons are just too short here. Now, if you're living in a warmer climate, that may not be an issue because you've got a longer summer. Caladiums are also a nice plant, and they come as a type of root system. So the trick to these is plant them early, plant them at the right depth. So you do want to research each plant and figure out where it should be planted. Dahlias, for instance, we plant fairly deep. Caladiums, I would plant much shallower. So you kind of have to look up each one of these and find out what the right depth is. And you're planting them very much like a perennial. You sort of put one root per hole. You don't do this multiple bulbs in one hole kind of thing. Plant them just like any other plant. Most of these like lots of sun. They like to have water when they're growing, and they're going to be growing all summer long. So they like to be watered all summer long. If they do start making seeds, it's a good idea to deadhead because you typically don't want the seeds on these. Now, if you do want the seeds, you want to play around with them, great. Let them make seeds and collect it. Otherwise, deadhead them. Let that energy go back into the root and not into making seeds. Except in a few cases, you have to dig them up in the fall. Once they're inside, there's many different ways to store these. Generally, you take them and put them in some container that's not airtight. So like a wooden crate works, or a cardboard box with holes in it works. And then you put something in there that holds a bit of moisture. So wood shavings, peat moss, potting soil. Some people use their garden soil. Lots of formulas here. And depending on the root, some are really easy to do. So an elephant ear, you can pretty much have it sitting on the shelf with nothing and it will survive. If you do that with a dahlia root, it will just dry out. You have to keep them a little moister. They like to be cool, dark, and a very slight amount of moisture so they don't dry out. Here's a begonia. These are beautiful, very easy to start in the spring. It's actually a corm, kind of like a bulb. So what you do, you buy this, you start giving it a little warmth, and you start giving it a little moisture. Not too much moisture or it may get mold on it. Once you've got a good growth, then you start watering more. Remember, these things have no roots. These are dried. All the feeder roots are dead. They're lost over the winter. So what you start with in the spring is the tuber part, but it doesn't have any feeder roots. So there's no sense watering a lot because it can't absorb any water until it makes new roots. So we want to give it a little moisture so it feels that moisture and starts it growing. We want to give it a little warmth that will also trigger it to grow. And then very slowly, as it starts to grow, you water more. And the biggest mistake most people make is they water too much, then they get the thing rotting and then it's dead. You don't have to rush on the water. That tuber has lots of moisture and food to make a good shoot. Okay, that shoot can be several inches tall before you actually start watering it. Here's one of my favorite. It's Agapanthus. It's not hardy here, although I have a friend living in Guelph who keeps it outside over winter. She covers it with a lot of straw, and hers managed to make it through the winter. What I do with these is I leave them in a pot, and in the fall I let them get some cold, so they actually get frost. That's okay. They can be out there on quite cold days, maybe early December. They're still outside. And then I bring them in and they go dormant. And I just keep them in the pot. I water them maybe once a month with a little bit of water just to keep them alive. And then in spring, they come back out into a warm area. They start to grow. Once they're growing, I start to water them and away we go. And I had the same plants in the same pot for year after year. The blue ones are really spectacular. They also come in whites, but the blue on these are so nice that I think you got to go for a blue one. Cannas are also very interesting. They have a very unusual flower, and you either grow them for the flower or sometimes you grow them for the leaf. And I really like these leaves. Unfortunately, the ones with the better leaves generally don't have as nice flowers. And the ones with really nice large flowers are generally green leaved. Again, very similar. They have a root structure. You can buy it in a pot and it's ready to go, or you can buy it dry and then you start it yourself. These can actually take quite a bit of water in the garden. We have dahlias, which lots of people love, and there's many, many different forms. Little pom-pom ones, little spider ones, large flowers, small flowers, singles, doubles, any color you can imagine. You could have a whole garden just of dahlias. The problem with these is that you do have to bring them in the fall. They can't overwinter in a Zone 5 garden. And that's the only real downside. They're not the easiest root to keep over winter. If you keep it too dry, they shrivel up and die. If you keep it too moist, they get moldy and die. So there's this happy medium with a little bit of moisture to keep them from shriveling and not too much. Some people take them and wash them and clean them really well and wrap them in saran wrap. I've tried that. That's a lot of work. So I generally don't do that, but a lot of experts do that. Buy yourself some tubers, grow them in the garden, bring them in, and then research how to store them. And there's 1,000 different ways of doing it. This is what the root looks like. And these round pieces here are the root part, the tuber part. If you cut those off, they may not grow. You really need a piece of the main stem so that you get one of those eyes. So if you just cut these all off and say, oh, I got here 20 dahlias, you might end up with no dahlias if you cut in the wrong spot. Here's one of my favorite plants that I've been growing over the last few years, and I've got several videos on these, on how to plant them and how to store them. I just think elephant ears are fantastic. Probably because I live in a cold climate and I want to be in a tropical place, and these things just look so tropical. So this is one bulb. It's quite big. It's like a large grapefruit, or maybe even a little larger than that. And I start them inside. So by the time the last frost date is gone, they're already a foot high and making leaves. And I put them in the garden, and they like lots of moisture. So I water it heavily, and I fertilize this one. One year I tried growing these in the soil and in water to see how they did. And in fact, they both did really well, and it was hard to choose between them. The advantage of growing them in water is that you don't have to water them all the time. If you grow them in the soil, they do like lots of moisture, so you do want to water them on a regular basis. Put them somewhere near the water tap so you don't forget. But I have a little pond just behind this plant, and I can set them right in the water. So what I do is I pot them up into a large 5-gallon pot, put soil in them, and then I set the whole thing in the water, so there's always water in the bottom inch or 2 inches of that pot. And so I never have to water all summer long, and they do really well in there. These guys are just fantastic. These are endos, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but you can get them in the grocery store, and they're very inexpensive. Each one of these is about the size of a smaller potato, and they're somewhere under $1 each. You can buy a bunch of them if you like. Try to pick the biggest one you can find, and these will grow into elephant ears. Now, it's a slightly different species than the plant I showed you before, but the plant looks exactly the same. So what I suggest you do, go to the grocery store in the next couple weeks, bring them home, and the easiest way to do this is just pot them up. Get yourself a 6-inch pot, some potting media, put it in there, keep it warm. Add a little bit of moisture so that that potting media isn't bone dry, but don't keep them wet. Just a little bit of moisture. If you look at these, there are no roots on these, so they don't need to be watered for a while. What it will do is start growing some roots, and then it will start making a shoot. And when you see the shoot above the ground coming out of the pot, then it's time to start slowly increasing the amount of water. And they'll grow quite quickly. Take them outside, plant them in the ground, give them a little fertilizer, give them lots of water, and you'll end up with elephant ears that are 3-4 feet tall. You can store these bulbs and keep them for the following year, or quite honestly, just pitch them and go buy some new ones next spring. In fact, what I like to do now when I'm in the grocery store is, starting in sort of February, I keep my eye on them, because sometimes they're on the small size, and I wait until they get some really big ones in, and then I buy them for the garden. And you can just put them on a shelf somewhere for a couple months if you get them too early, and then grow them. I've made several other videos about elephant ears, and I'm going to put a link to those in the top right-hand corner. Have fun in the garden.